I walked into my garage expecting to grab a forgotten client file. Instead, I found my mother standing over my workbench with fresh copies of my house keys lined up in perfect rows. Why did she need keys to my bedroom? Why had she opened my property folder? And why did she look more annoyed at being interrupted than guilty? When I demanded an explanation, she barely looked up. "Your sister needs a safe place for the kids," she said, as if that answered everything. But one missing document and a ring of carefully labeled keys told me this wasn't about helping family anymore. If you're watching from somewhere in the US or anywhere else in the world, tell me where you're tuning in from. I'd also love to know your local time right now, and if stories about family boundaries and standing up for yourself resonate with you, consider subscribing so you don't miss what happened next. I wish I could tell you I confronted my mom right then and there, demanded every answer, and somehow untangled everything before dinner. That isn't what happened. I stood in my garage after she left, staring at the empty space on my workbench where she'd packed the duplicate keys into her purse. The silence felt heavier than the argument we'd just had. Mom had driven away insisting I was making something out of nothing. Maybe I wanted to believe her. I carried the property folder into my home office and laid everything across my desk exactly the way I would review financial records during an internal audit. My career had trained me to trust documentation more than memory. Paper rarely lied. People sometimes did. Every sheet was removed one at a time. Property tax statements, insurance declarations, the warranty paperwork from when I replaced the roof 3 years earlier, the original warranty for my HVAC system, my homeowner's policy, the deed, the mortgage satisfaction letter proving I'd finally paid off the house 8 months ago. Everything seemed normal. For a moment, I actually felt embarrassed. Maybe I had imagined something missing because I was upset about the keys. Then I reached for the slim blue folder that always stayed beneath the deed. It wasn't there. I checked again, then a third time. My heartbeat sped up. The missing folder wasn't my deed. If someone had stolen that, it would have been obvious. It was something less valuable to most people, but incredibly important to me. Inside that blue folder had been my notarized emergency property authorization packet. Years earlier, after buying my house, an attorney had suggested I prepare instructions in case I were ever hospitalized unexpectedly. The packet listed temporary emergency contacts, the location of insurance documents, utility information veterinarian instructions for my Labrador, and limited authorization forms that could be used only under very specific circumstances. It wasn't ownership paperwork. No one could use it to take my house, but it contained signatures, property details, emergency contacts, and enough personal information that it never should have left my possession. I searched every drawer. Nothing. I looked through my office trash can. Nothing. I even checked the scanner beside my printer in case I'd forgotten to file it. Still nothing. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. "What now?" she asked, sounding tired rather than concerned. "My emergency authorization packet is gone." A pause. "I don't know anything about that." "It was inside the property folder. You probably moved it." "I didn't." "You've always been so organized that you forget you're human." Her voice stayed calm. Too calm. "I know exactly where I keep my legal papers." She sighed dramatically. "Miranda, honestly, you're acting like I robbed a bank." "You opened files that weren't yours." "I was looking for the warranty information because Rachel may need to know how things work if she stays there." The sentence landed harder than I expected. "If she stays here—" "Well, if she has to." "We've never discussed that." "You didn't have to. Sometimes family steps in before being asked." I closed my eyes. "Mom, who decided Rachel was moving into my house?" Another pause. Then she answered softly. I assumed you would. Before I could respond, another call came through. Rachel. I switched over. Her voice cracked before she finished saying my name. Miranda, I don't know what to do. I leaned back in my chair. What's happening? My landlord posted a notice. What kind of notice? He isn't renewing my lease. When? End of the month. I glanced at the calendar. That was less than 3 weeks away. I've been trying to find somewhere affordable, but everything is either too expensive or too small for me and the girls. She sounded exhausted. Not manipulative. Just tired. I wasn't going to ask you, she whispered. Mom kept saying she'd talk to you. So Mom had already been negotiating my life without me. Rachel continued. I told her I didn't want to pressure you. I believed that part. Rachel had always depended on our mother emotionally, but she wasn't naturally confrontational. What exactly did Mom promise you? Only that we'd probably stay with you for a little while. A little while, until I got back on my feet. Neither of us spoke. I pictured my 2 nieces. Emma was 10 now. Lily had just turned 7. They weren't responsible for any of this. I want to help the girls, I finally said. I know. But helping isn't the same thing as handing over my house. I understand. Did she? I honestly couldn't tell. After we hung up, I made myself a cup of coffee even though it was nearly 6 in the evening. I needed something to do with my hands. The kitchen window overlooked the driveway. As I stood there, my next-door neighbor, Evelyn Brooks, waved from her mailbox. Evelyn had lived beside me since the day I moved in. She'd watched me repaint the house, replace the landscaping, and celebrate paying off my mortgage with nothing more glamorous than takeout pizza on the front porch. She knew this neighborhood better than anyone. I walked outside. You look worried, she said immediately. It's been one of those days. She smiled sympathetically. I figured something strange was going on. What do you mean? I wasn't sure whether I should mention it. A knot formed in my stomach. Mention what? She rested both hands on her cane. Earlier this week, your sister stopped by. I frowned. Rachel. Mm-hmm. What was she doing? I thought maybe you asked her to? No. She spent nearly half an hour around your backyard. My pulse quickened. What exactly was she doing? Evelyn shrugged. Measuring. Fence line. Patio. Side gate. With what? A tape measure. I stared at her. You've got one of those nice privacy fences. I assumed she was planning a play area for the girls or something. I forced a smile. Maybe. But nothing about that explanation made sense. Rachel hadn't even moved in. According to Mom, we hadn't even reached the point of asking. Yet she'd already measured my property. I thanked Evelyn and walked slowly back toward my front door. For the first time all day, I stopped thinking about copied keys. Instead, I started wondering whether everyone else already believed the decision had been made. That night, just after 11, my phone buzzed on my nightstand. Security alert, front entry, unrecognized key attempt. I sat upright before the notification finished loading. Someone had just tried to unlock my front door with a physical key that my smart lock didn't recognize. I didn't call the police, at least not that night. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the notification while my heart pounded against my ribs. The smart lock displayed only a few pieces of information. 11:08 p.m., physical key inserted, access denied. Whoever had tried to open my front door hadn't known I'd upgraded the deadbolt 6 months earlier after a neighborhood burglary. The original key no longer worked on the front entrance, but the garage still used the older lock. I slipped on a sweatshirt, quietly picked up the baseball bat I kept beside the coat closet, not because I imagined myself becoming some action hero, but because it felt better than walking into the dark, empty-handed, and checked every room. Nothing. Every window was locked. The backyard gate was closed. The garage door was secured. No one was inside. I checked the driveway camera. No vehicle, only a shadow crossing near the porch. The image wasn't clear enough to identify anyone. Whoever had been there had stood just outside the motion light, inserted a key, waited a second, and walked away. It lasted less than 20 seconds. I barely slept. By sunrise, I had already decided something. I wasn't going to accuse anyone else. Not yet. If years working in compliance had taught me anything, it was that assumptions ruined investigations. People often became so certain they already knew the answer that they stopped collecting facts. I wasn't going to make that mistake. Monday morning, instead of going directly to the office, I stopped by the security company that had installed my cameras. Kevin Morales greeted me with his usual smile. "You look like someone who had a rough weekend." "You've no idea." Kevin had upgraded my home system the previous year after I complained that the original cameras missed too many motion events. "What can I do for you?" "I need archived footage." "Something happened?" "I hope not." An hour later, we were sitting in front of a large monitor reviewing recordings stored in cloud backup. Kevin pulled up every exterior camera from the previous month. "We'll start with the garage," he said. For nearly 40 minutes, we watched completely ordinary life. Delivery drivers, neighborhood kids riding bicycles, me leaving for work, returning home, walking my Labrador Winston. Nothing unusual. Then Kevin paused. "Hold on." The timestamp read Tuesday, 2:17 p.m. I had been at work. My garage door slowly opened. A silver SUV pulled halfway inside. Mom's SUV. She stepped out carrying 2 reusable shopping bags. "Did you give her a garage code?" Kevin asked. "No." "Then how?" "I already knew. The copied keys, except this recording was from 4 days before I had caught her making them." Kevin rewound the footage. Mom unlocked the side garage door with a key she already possessed. I frowned. "That can't be right." "You sure?" "I changed all my keys after buying the house." Kevin zoomed in. The resolution wasn't perfect, but there was no question. She had unlocked the garage manually, not with a keypad, not with a remote, with a key. "I don't understand," I whispered. We kept watching. Mom disappeared inside for almost 23 minutes. She came back carrying exactly the same 2 shopping bags. Nothing looked different. No boxes, no furniture, no electronics, nothing that suggested theft. "What room connects through that interior door?" Kevin asked. "My laundry room." So she had access to the whole house. I nodded slowly. "Can we see another day?" He searched again. 3 days later, another visit. Same SUV, same side entrance, another 20-minute stay. Again while I was at work. Kevin looked at me. "Do you normally let family stop by?" "No." "You sure?" "I've never given anyone permission to come inside while I'm gone." He leaned back. "I'm not telling you what to do." "I know. But if someone is entering your house repeatedly without your knowledge..." "I know." He didn't need to finish. We exported every clip onto an encrypted flash drive. Before leaving, I asked one more question. "Can the interior cameras show anything? You only installed cameras in the foyer and hallway?" "I know." We opened those recordings. Mom never walked through the front entrance. She came directly from the garage. The hallway camera captured only a few seconds before she turned toward my home office. Toward the filing cabinet. I felt sick. Back at work, I couldn't concentrate. Numbers blurred together on my monitor. Around lunchtime, my friend Melissa Grant knocked lightly on my office door. "You've been staring at the same spreadsheet for 15 minutes. I laughed without humor. "I'm having family problems. The dangerous kind. I'm starting to think so." Melissa closed the door behind her. She'd known me for nearly 8 years. We'd survived corporate restructurings, impossible audits, and enough compliance reviews to recognize when the other person was unraveling. "What happened?" I told her everything. The keys, the missing authorization packet, Rachel's housing situation, the failed attempt at my front door, the footage. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her arms. "Can I tell you something you probably won't like?" "Go ahead." "Right now you're thinking like a daughter." I frowned. "What does that mean? You keep asking why." "I need to know why." "No." She shook her head gently. "You need to know what?" I stared at her. She continued. "When we investigate financial fraud, we don't start with motives. We start with transactions. Facts, timelines, documents. The motive comes later." I leaned back. She was right. Again. "So stop asking why your mother would do this. Instead, ask exactly what she was trying to accomplish." The sentence stayed with me all afternoon. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing every exported video frame one by one, not watching the motion, studying details, tiny details, objects, hands, folders, paper. At nearly 9 o'clock, I paused one frame. Mom was standing beside my filing cabinet. The cabinet drawer was open. She wasn't removing anything. She was holding up a large cream-colored envelope. I zoomed in. The image became grainy, still unreadable. I sharpened it, adjusted brightness, increased contrast. One corner of the logo slowly came into focus, a navy blue scale of justice. Below it were several words. The first became readable. Brooks? Another adjustment. Brooks and Avery estate law. I stopped breathing for a second. Estate law. Not family counseling, not housing assistance, not social services. An estate law office. I immediately opened my filing cabinet. The envelope wasn't there anymore. I searched every folder twice. Nothing. Then I remembered something. About 6 months earlier, I'd requested information about updating my estate documents after paying off my mortgage. The law office had mailed me an information packet. I'd skimmed it, filed it away, forgotten about it. Now it had disappeared. Why would my mother need paperwork from an estate attorney unless... No, I refused to jump to conclusions. Melissa's voice echoed in my head. Facts, not theories. The next morning before driving to work, I picked up my phone and searched for the law firm's number. When the receptionist answered, I introduced myself. "My name is Miranda Holland. I believe I need to schedule an appointment." The receptionist offered me an appointment 2 weeks away. "I was hoping for something sooner," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I understand, Ms. Holland. Mr. Brooks has a full calendar. It concerns documents related to my property." She hesitated. "Please hold for a moment." Soft piano music filled my ear while I stared through my windshield in the parking lot outside my office. I hadn't even turned off the engine. Less than a minute later, she returned. "Mr. Brooks can see you tomorrow morning at 9. That surprised me. "I appreciate it. The address is already in your confirmation email." The call ended. For the rest of the day, I replayed that conversation in my head. She had sounded routine at first. Then I mentioned my property, and suddenly a full schedule wasn't full anymore. Something about that bothered me. The next morning I arrived 15 minutes early. Brooks and Avery occupied the second floor of a restored brick building in downtown Charlotte. It wasn't flashy. Dark wood furniture, framed degrees, and shelves filled with estate planning books gave the office a quiet professionalism that immediately put people at ease. Daniel Brooks greeted me himself. He appeared to be in his early 50s, neatly dressed with the kind of calm expression that probably came from spending decades helping families navigate emotionally charged decisions. "Miss Holland." "Miranda is fine." He shook my hand. "Come on back." His office overlooked a tree-lined street. After we sat down, he folded his hands across a legal pad. "Your phone message mentioned concerns involving your property." "Yes." I took a slow breath. "I need to ask something that may sound unusual. I've heard plenty of unusual questions. I believe my mother may have taken documents from my home." He nodded without reacting. "I also found security footage showing her holding an envelope from this office." For the first time, his expression changed. Only slightly, but enough for me to notice. "I see." "I don't know whether she contacted you." He remained silent. "I understand you can't discuss another person's private matters." "That's correct. I just need to know whether there's something I should be worried about." He leaned back carefully. "Tell me exactly what has happened." For nearly 20 minutes, I walked him through everything. The copied keys, the missing emergency authorization packet, the unauthorized visits while I was at work, the failed key attempt at my front door, the missing envelope bearing his firm's logo. He listened without interrupting, occasionally making brief notes. When I finished, he stayed quiet for several seconds. Finally, he spoke. "First, let me reassure you of something." I waited. "If your deed has not changed, ownership of your property has not changed." I nodded. I checked. "The deed is still exactly where it belongs." "Good. So this isn't about someone stealing my house?" "No." Relief washed over me. At least that nightmare wasn't real, but Daniel didn't look finished. "There are many reasons someone may ask questions involving residential property." "What kinds of questions?" He chose his words carefully. "I cannot disclose whether your mother or anyone else has spoken with this office." "I understand. However," he paused, "I can explain in general terms the types of questions families sometimes ask." "Please." He turned his legal pad toward me and drew 3 short lines. "First ownership." He crossed it out. "You've already confirmed that's intact." He wrote another. "Second inheritance." He shook his head. "That doesn't seem relevant." Then he wrote the third. "Occupancy." I frowned. "What exactly does that mean?" He folded his hands again. "Occupancy concerns who lives in a property." "I already live there." "Yes." "But families occasionally seek guidance when multiple relatives share one residence." "I don't." "Correct. So why would anyone ask?" "I can't answer that." He let the silence settle before continuing. "What I can tell you is that people sometimes request information about family occupancy agreements." "What are those?" "A written understanding describing who lives in a home, what responsibilities they have, and whether their occupancy is temporary or ongoing." I stared at him. "My mother told me my sister might need somewhere to stay." "Temporary housing can certainly be handled informally." "So why create paperwork?" He gave a careful answer. "Sometimes families want documentation for school enrollment." I nodded slowly. "Mail delivery." Another nod. "Residency verification." The room suddenly felt smaller. "My sister has 2 daughters. I remember you mentioning that. If someone wanted to establish residency, they might ask questions about documentation." He still wasn't accusing anyone. He wasn't even suggesting anyone had done anything improper. He was simply explaining how the process generally worked. And somehow that made it more unsettling. I looked down at my notebook. You're saying someone could try to build the appearance that another person already lives in the house? In some situations, yes. My stomach tightened. Daniel noticed. Miss Holland. Miranda. Miranda, establishing residency does not transfer ownership. I know. But it can create practical complications. What kind? If expectations are unclear, disagreements over occupancy sometimes become emotionally and legally difficult. I thought about the copied keys, the measuring tape, the missing paperwork, Mom assuming Rachel would simply move in. One by one, the pieces were beginning to line up, not into a complete picture, but into enough of one to make me uncomfortable. Daniel closed his notebook. May I ask you something? Of course. Has your sister ever received mail at your address? I answered immediately. No. Then I hesitated. At least, not that I know of. Has she ever listed your home as her residence? I don't think so. Has anyone discussed enrolling children in a school district connected to your address? No. He watched my face carefully. If any of those things begin happening, document everything. I swallowed. I already started. Good. Then he said something I hadn't expected. I would also recommend that you avoid accusing anyone until you have complete information. I almost smiled. My best friend said something similar. It's excellent advice. He walked to a bookshelf and returned with a printed brochure. This explains basic occupancy law in plain English. I glanced at the title. Understanding Residential Occupancy and Family Housing Agreements. No legal jargon. I asked. He smiled. I try not to torture people unnecessarily. For the first time all morning, I laughed. It lasted only a second. As we walked toward reception, Daniel stopped beside the doorway. There is one more thing. I turned back. His expression had become serious again. I want you to answer honestly. I will. Has anyone been trying to create evidence that your sister already lives in your house? I opened my mouth to answer. Nothing came out, because suddenly I remembered Evelyn mentioning Rachel measuring the backyard, the copied keys, the missing authorization packet. And then, almost as if my brain had been waiting for permission to connect the dots, another memory surfaced. Just 3 weeks earlier, I'd found an unfamiliar children's backpack hanging inside my garage. Rachel had laughed and said one of the girls accidentally left it during a visit. At the time, I hadn't thought twice about it. Now I couldn't stop wondering how many other small things I'd dismissed. I thanked Daniel and walked slowly back to my car. Before I even started the engine, I unlocked my phone and searched through the photos I'd taken around my house over the past month. I wasn't looking for documents anymore. I was looking for signs that someone had been quietly trying to make my home look like Rachel's long before anyone ever asked my permission. I spent that entire weekend doing something that would have sounded obsessive to anyone who didn't know what had already happened. I audited my own life, every receipt, every delivery confirmation, every security notification, every photo my phone had automatically backed up to the cloud. At work, I reviewed financial records for a living. Small inconsistencies often uncovered much larger problems. A single duplicate invoice or one unfamiliar vendor could lead to months of hidden fraud. I approached my own home the same way. Not emotionally, methodically. Saturday morning, I opened my photo library and searched by date. My phone had quietly documented more than I remembered. Pictures of Winston sleeping on the patio, my new flower beds, a cracked sprinkler head I'd meant to replace, a barbecue with coworkers. Nothing unusual. Until I noticed something in the background of one photo. It had been taken almost a month earlier while I was showing Melissa the tomatoes growing in my backyard. Near the side entrance sat 3 cardboard boxes. I zoomed in. One box had children's cartoon stickers across the side. Another had the words, "Rachel, winter clothes." I frowned. I didn't remember those boxes. Then I checked the timestamp. They had been sitting beside my garage for nearly 6 hours before disappearing. I searched later photos. Gone. Someone had moved them inside, or taken them away, but I hadn't. I drove to my garage storage shelves. Nothing. No boxes, no labels, no winter clothes. My pulse quickened. Someone had been bringing belongings onto my property long before any conversation about temporary housing had ever taken place. I made a note. Timeline entry. Children's boxes delivered approximately 4 weeks earlier. No conclusions. Only facts. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Rachel. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered. "Hi. Do you have a minute?" "I do." She sounded nervous. "Mom said you've been upset." "That's one way to describe it. I don't want us fighting." "Neither do I." There was a long silence. Then she asked quietly, "Can we meet?" I hesitated. "Just us. No mom. No pressure." "I'd like that." We agreed to meet at a neighborhood coffee shop later that afternoon. Rachel arrived wearing jean sneakers and the same tired expression I'd heard over the phone earlier in the week. She hugged me awkwardly. I hugged her back. Whatever was happening between us, she was still my sister. For a few minutes we talked about ordinary things, the girls, school, work. Neither of us wanted to be the first person to bring up the house. Finally, she sighed. "I hate this." "So do I." "I never wanted Mom to put you in the middle." "I don't think I'm in the middle." She looked confused. "I think I'm standing directly where someone wanted me all along." Rachel lowered her eyes. "I really am losing the apartment." "I know. I'm scared." "I know. My credit isn't great." "I know. I wasn't pretending. I never thought you were." Her shoulders relaxed just a little. Then I asked carefully, "When did you first think about moving into my house?" She looked surprised. "I didn't. Not until recently." She nodded. "Mom brought it up after my landlord raised the rent." "When exactly?" Rachel thought for a moment. "Maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago." 5 or 6 weeks. My mind immediately jumped back to the cardboard boxes, the measuring tape, the garage visits. The dates were close enough to matter. "What did Mom tell you?" "That you'd probably say yes." "Did she ever say we'd already talked?" Rachel hesitated. "She said she understood how you felt." "That's not what I asked." She looked uncomfortable. "She made it sound like you were mostly worried about timing." I stared at her. "So you believed I already knew?" "I did." The disappointment on her face looked genuine. "I thought she was helping." "I never agreed to anything." Rachel rubbed her forehead. "Oh." Neither of us spoke. The waitress quietly refilled our coffee. After another minute, Rachel whispered, "I guess I owe you an apology. You don't know everything yet." "No." "But apparently, I don't know everything either." For the first time since all of this began, I realized Rachel might not have been receiving the same story I had. That didn't erase what she'd done, but it changed how I viewed her role. When we stood to leave, Rachel reached into her purse looking for her car keys. A folded envelope slipped onto the floor. She picked it up quickly. Too quickly. I recognized the logo before she tucked it away. Charlotte Public Schools. "You already enrolled the girls somewhere?" I asked. Her face froze. "No." "Rachel." "It's just information." "Can I see it?" She hesitated long enough to answer the question without speaking. Finally, she handed me the envelope. Inside were enrollment forms. Most of the pages were blank, except one. The section asking for the student's residential address had already been filled out. My address. I looked up slowly. Why is my house listed here? Rachel's face turned pale. Did you fill this out?
No.
Who did? She swallowed.
Mom.
The coffee shop suddenly felt impossibly quiet.
When? A couple weeks ago.
And you thought I knew? Rachel nodded. She said it would save time after we moved. I carefully folded the paperwork and handed it back. I need you to answer one more question.
Okay.
Has any mail been sent to my house in your name? She didn't answer immediately.
Rachel?
A few pieces.
What kind of mail?
I don't know exactly. Who told you to do that?
My mom.
She corrected herself almost instantly. Our mom. She said schools liked seeing consistent records. My chest tightened. This wasn't one misunderstanding. This was a series of deliberate steps. Individually, each one looked small. Together, they began forming a pattern. Before leaving, Rachel looked at me with tears in her eyes.
I never wanted to trick you. I believe that. But I should have asked you myself. Yes, you should have.
She nodded once.
I know.
After we separated, I didn't drive home immediately. Instead, I parked across the street from my local post office. I sat there thinking. Then another memory surfaced. About 3 weeks earlier, my mail carrier had asked whether I preferred placing larger envelopes inside the garage because your family has been picking things up. At the time, I'd assumed Mom had collected a package for me. Now I wasn't so sure. I walked inside the post office and asked whether someone could explain how mail forwarding and change of address requests worked. The clerk answered politely, explaining that she couldn't discuss another customer's information. I understand, I said. I'm only asking generally. She handed me several brochures explaining forwarding requests and address verification. One sentence caught my attention. Certain organizations may use mailed correspondence as one factor when verifying residential information. One factor, not proof, but another piece, another brick, another document. As I walked back toward my car, my phone vibrated. It wasn't a call. It was an email notification from my electric utility company. Subject: confirmation of authorized occupant request. For a moment, I thought it had been sent by mistake. Then I opened it. Someone had submitted an online request asking that Rachel Turner be added as an authorized resident associated with my service address. The request had not yet been approved. It was waiting for verification. I read the email 3 times before I believed it. Confirmation of authorized occupant request. It wasn't an approval. It wasn't a legal declaration that Rachel lived in my home. It was simply a request waiting for verification. Still, someone had been confident enough to submit it. That mattered. I clicked the customer service number immediately. After navigating 2 automated menus, a representative answered. Thank you for calling Carolina Electric. My name is Denise. How may I help you today?
My name is Miranda Holland. I received an email about an authorized occupant request that I didn't make.
I'd be happy to review your account. She verified my identity using several security questions before accessing my file. I see the pending request. I didn't submit it. That's perfectly fine. Since it's pending, no changes have been made.
Can you tell me who submitted it?
I'm sorry, I can't disclose personal information connected to an online request.
I understand.
What I can do is immediately deny the request and place additional verification requirements on your account. Please do. Within 2 minutes, she added a verbal passcode that would be required before any future changes could be made. Anything else I can help you with today? One question? Of course. If someone had already been listed as an authorized occupant, would that have given them ownership of my account? She chuckled softly. Oh, goodness, no. I smiled despite everything. I figured. It simply allows another resident to discuss billing or service issues. So it's administrative. Exactly. The answer actually reassured me. No single piece of paperwork was dangerous by itself, but I was beginning to understand the strategy. School forms, mail, utility records, keys, boxes. If enough ordinary details accumulated over time, they could create the appearance that Rachel had already been living with me for months. Not ownership, not theft, expectation, momentum, social pressure. I thanked Denise and ended the call. Then I called Daniel Brooks. He answered later that afternoon. Brooks speaking. It's Miranda. What happened? I explained the utility request. He listened carefully. Did they approve it? No. Good. I had them reject it immediately. Excellent. I heard papers moving on his desk. Miranda, I'd like you to stop thinking about individual incidents. I've been trying. Start thinking chronologically. I already have a timeline. Good. Expand it. Include every contact, every document, every attempted change, every conversation, even if it seems insignificant. Exactly. Why? Because patterns carry weight. I wrote those words at the top of my notebook. Patterns carry weight, he continued. I'd also recommend securing everything important. I've already changed one lock. I mean everything. What exactly? Original documents. Passwords, access codes, garage remotes, emergency contacts, spare keys. When we finished talking, I took the rest of the afternoon off from work, not because I was panicking, because I finally understood that hoping things would calm down wasn't a plan. Protecting my home was. My first stop was the locksmith. A gray-haired man named Frank looked over my existing locks. You want every cylinder replaced, every exterior lock, front, back, garage, side entrance. He nodded. Anyone lose a key? Something like that. He smiled politely without asking another question. An hour later, every lock had been replaced. He handed me a sealed envelope containing the new keys. There are only 4. I'll take all 4. You don't want us to keep a backup? No. He grinned. Fair enough. The next appointment was with Kevin from the security company. He arrived carrying 2 boxes of upgraded equipment. I figured this wasn't just curiosity anymore. It isn't. We walked through the house together. I'd like cameras covering every entrance. No problem. And one facing my office. He looked at me. Inside. Inside. If someone's coming into the house again, I want to know exactly where they go. By evening, my phone displayed live views from 6 cameras instead of 3. Kevin also added instant alerts whenever a door opened. Before leaving, he handed me another small device, a glass break sensor. I hope I never need it. So do I. That night, my home felt different. Safer. Not because I'd turned it into a fortress. Because I'd finally stopped pretending everyone with my last name automatically deserved unrestricted access. Sunday morning, I drove to my bank. The manager recognized me immediately. Good morning, Miss Holland. I'd like to rent a safe deposit box. We have several available. Within 30 minutes, the documents that mattered most were no longer inside my house. The deed, the mortgage satisfaction letter, my estate planning paperwork, birth certificate, passport, investment records. The emergency authorization packet couldn't go into the box because I still hadn't found it. That bothered me more than anything. Someone had intentionally removed exactly one folder. Not everything, just one. Back home, I spread a legal pad across my dining room table. I divided it into columns: date, event, evidence, witnesses. I filled in everything I knew. Mom entering through the garage, security footage, duplicate keys. Rachel measuring the backyard, children's boxes, school paperwork, mail, utility request. Every item connected to another. By itself, each looked almost harmless. Together they told a story, not one I wanted to believe, but one I could now prove. Late that afternoon, Daniel called again. "I've been thinking. That's either good news or expensive." He laughed. "Probably both." "What is it?" "I don't think your first move should be sending legal notices." I frowned. "Really?" "Not yet." "Why?" "Because once lawyers become involved, everyone becomes defensive." "I don't want revenge." "I know." "What do you recommend?" "A family meeting." I almost laughed. "You haven't met my family." "I don't need to." "They deserve one opportunity to hear exactly what you know." "And if they deny everything, they probably will. And if they don't listen, then your documentation becomes even more valuable." I looked down at the notebook filled with dates and evidence. "You really think that's the best path?" "I do." "Why?" "Because courts appreciate people who attempt reasonable solutions before escalating." He paused. "And because someday you'll need to remember that you gave them every chance to tell the truth." After hanging up, I wasn't convinced, but the advice stayed with me. Around 7 that evening, my phone rang again. Mom. I almost let it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. "Hello?" Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. "Good news." I didn't respond. "I talked to Rachel." "Okay." "The girls are so excited." My stomach tightened. "They've already started packing." I closed my eyes. "What are you talking about?" "I told them to come Sunday after church." "Come where?" "To your house, sweetheart." She laughed lightly as though discussing a family picnic. "They'll bring just the essentials first." "Mom." "I've already asked your Uncle Thomas to help unload the boxes." Before I could say another word, she added one final sentence. "I knew once everyone was together, you'd realize this was the right thing to do." Then she hung up. I slowly lowered the phone. She hadn't asked. She hadn't even assumed anymore. She had already invited people to move into my home. I didn't call my mother back. For several minutes, I simply stood in my kitchen holding my phone, staring out the window at the backyard Rachel had measured weeks earlier. My first instinct was to text everyone. "Don't come. This isn't happening." Instead, I set my phone down. Daniel's advice echoed in my mind. Give them one opportunity, not because they deserved it, because I deserved to know I'd done everything reasonably possible before drawing a permanent line. I texted my mother only one sentence. "Sunday at 2:00 p.m. We'll talk before anyone carries a single box inside." She responded almost immediately. "Wonderful. I knew you'd come around." I stared at the heart emoji longer than I should have. She hadn't understood my message at all. Or maybe she had chosen not to. Either possibility worried me. Sunday morning arrived far too quickly. I woke before sunrise, not because I was nervous, because I had a plan. Every document Daniel had told me to organize sat inside a black leather portfolio on my dining room table. Inside were neatly labeled sections: security footage, garage access logs, photographs, timeline, utility records, school enrollment copy, printed email from the electric company, photos of the copied key labels, a written inventory showing exactly which emergency documents were missing. Everything was organized exactly the way I prepared audit reports at work. Facts first. Opinions never. By noon, Kevin had remotely confirmed every camera was recording properly. The new locks had been installed for several days. The alarm system was active. Nothing about the afternoon depended on winning an argument. It depended on remaining calm. At 1:56, Rachel's SUV pulled into my driveway. Behind her came Mom. A third vehicle arrived moments later, my Uncle Thomas. Rachel stepped out first. My nieces Emma and Lily climbed from the back seat, laughing about something completely unrelated to the tension hanging over the driveway. Seeing them hurt, they had no idea adults had turned them into the center of a conflict they didn't create. Then I noticed the moving boxes. Not many. 6 medium-sized boxes, 2 plastic storage bins, 3 suitcases, enough to suggest someone expected to stay. Mom smiled as though she were arriving for Thanksgiving dinner. There she is. She walked toward me with her arms open. I didn't move. The smile faded slightly. Miranda. We're talking first. She glanced toward the driveway. Oh, don't worry about all this. She pointed toward the boxes. The men can start carrying things inside while we visit. No. The word wasn't loud, but it stopped everyone. No one brings anything into my house. Rachel immediately looked uncomfortable. Mom? It's fine. Mom interrupted. We'll only put everything in the guest room. There isn't a guest room anymore. She blinked. What? I turned it into my office last year. Oh. She recovered quickly. Well, then the girls can share your craft room. I don't have a craft room. Another pause. It suddenly occurred to me that Mom had been making plans based on an older version of my house. One she hadn't actually asked me about. She'd simply assumed. Uncle Thomas looked around awkwardly. I thought everybody already worked this out. I looked directly at him. No one has ever asked my permission. His eyebrows lifted. Mom answered before he could. She's exaggerating. I am not. Rachel finally spoke. I honestly thought you knew. I didn't. Mom sighed dramatically. We're wasting time. The children are standing in the driveway. They shouldn't have been brought here before we had a conversation. She shook her head. Miranda, sometimes kindness requires action before paperwork. I almost smiled. Paperwork. Of all the things she could have said. I picked up the black portfolio from the dining room table. I'd like everyone to come inside. Nobody touched a single box. Once everyone was seated, I remained standing. No speeches, no accusations. I simply opened the portfolio. Mom, I said quietly, when did you copy my house keys? Her face changed almost imperceptibly. I told you. For Rachel. I placed the first photograph on the table. It showed the labeled duplicate key ring, front door, garage, office, master bedroom. I asked one question. Why does Rachel need a key to my bedroom? Silence. Mom looked at the photograph, then away. Well, she didn't finish. I placed another page beside it. Security log. Garage entry. Tuesday, 2:17 p.m. Another, Friday. 4:42 p.m. You entered my house twice while I was at work. I was checking on things. Without permission. I was your mother. I nodded once. Yes, you are. I laid down another photograph, the security image showing her standing beside my filing cabinet. Then another, the enlarged image holding the estate law envelope. I wasn't hiding anything, she said. You didn't tell me. I didn't think you'd understand. I kept my voice level. You removed documents from my office. I borrowed them. They were never returned. Rachel looked from me to Mom. You took papers. Mom avoided her eyes. It wasn't important. I slid the next document across the table. A printed copy of the electric company's confirmation email. Someone requested Rachel be added as an authorized occupant on my utility account. Rachel's head snapped toward Mom. You did that. Mom hesitated. I was helping. You never told me. I was making things easier. Rachel's voice rose.
I didn't ask you to do that.
The room became very quiet. I wasn't the only person learning new information anymore. I reached into the folder again. This time I placed the school enrollment form onto the table. My address already filled in. Rachel covered her mouth. I thought you approved that. I had never seen it. She slowly turned toward Mom. You told me she'd already agreed. Mom rubbed her temples. I knew she eventually would.
No,
I said softly. You hoped I would. Those were two very different things. Uncle Thomas finally cleared his throat.
Linda.
He looked genuinely confused.
You told me Miranda invited Rachel weeks ago.
Mom didn't answer.
You said today was just moving day.
Still nothing. He looked at me.
You never invited them. No.
He leaned back in his chair. For the first time since arriving, he looked disappointed instead of supportive. Not disappointed in me, in his sister. Mom suddenly became defensive. Everybody's acting like I'm some criminal.
No,
I replied calmly. I'm treating this exactly as it happened. I slid the final document from the portfolio, a simple timeline, dates, times, evidence. Nothing emotional, nothing exaggerated. Just facts. No one spoke for nearly a full minute. Finally, Uncle Thomas broke the silence.
Linda.
His voice was lower than I'd ever heard it. You didn't ask for help.
You tried to create a situation where Miranda couldn't reasonably say no.
Mom opened her mouth. Before she could answer, emotion got the better of her. You don't understand. Tears filled her eyes. I was trying to save Rachel. I believe that. I truly did. But believing someone's intentions didn't erase what they had done. She looked directly at me. You've always landed on your feet. You've always had a good job. You've never really needed anyone. She took a shaky breath.
Rachel has struggled her whole life.
Then she said the sentence that explained more than any document ever could.
We had to get this settled before you met someone, got married, or decided to sell the house.
No one moved. No one spoke. Because in that single sentence, my mother admitted something none of us had been willing to say out loud. She hadn't been planning for Rachel's emergency. She had been planning for my future. And she had assumed she had the right to decide what happened to my home before I ever did. No one spoke after my mother's confession. The silence wasn't angry, it was stunned. Even the girls who had been coloring quietly at the dining room table with the crayons I'd set out for them sensed that something had shifted. Emma looked at Rachel and whispered, "Mom?" Rachel forced a smile. "It's okay, sweetheart." But it wasn't. Not anymore. My mother slowly sat down in one of the dining room chairs as though the energy had drained out of her body. She looked older than she had an hour earlier. For the first time that afternoon, she wasn't trying to persuade anyone. She was simply tired. Uncle Thomas stood.
I think I'll take the girls outside for a few minutes.
Rachel nodded gratefully. I'll come with you. Emma and Lily followed their great-uncle into the backyard, blissfully unaware that the adults were trying to untangle months, perhaps years, of decisions made without honesty. The front door closed. Now only 3 of us remained. Me, my mother, my sister. Mom stared at her hands. Rachel broke the silence first. Did you really tell everyone Miranda had already agreed? Mom answered without looking up. I told them she would. That's not what I asked. I may have let people believe it. Rachel let out a slow breath. You lied to me too. Mom finally looked at her. I was trying to protect you. Rachel shook her head. No. You were making decisions for me. Then she looked at me. And for Miranda. I had imagined this conversation dozens of times over the past week. In every version, I expected shouting, blame, old resentments. Instead, what I felt was sadness. Not because I had lost faith in my mother, that had already happened. I was grieving the realization that she'd spent years convincing herself that controlling our lives was the same as loving us. I sat across from her. "Mom." She looked up. "I need to understand something." She nodded weakly. "When did you first start thinking Rachel should live here?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked a question of her own. "Do you remember when Dad died?" I nodded. 7 years earlier, he'd suffered a sudden heart attack while mowing the lawn. Everything changed after that. Mom continued quietly. "After your father was gone, I started worrying all the time." "About what?" "About both of you." She glanced toward the backyard where Rachel was playing with the girls. "You built a career. You bought a beautiful home. You always had a plan." Then she smiled sadly. Rachel never stopped struggling. That much was true. Rachel had never been irresponsible. She simply hadn't had the same opportunities. Her marriage ended when Lily was a toddler. Childcare expenses swallowed most of her income. Every financial setback seemed to arrive just before she recovered from the last one. Mom looked back at me. "I kept thinking," she hesitated, "if anything ever happened to me?" "Rachel wouldn't have anyone." I listened without interrupting. "So I started imagining ways to keep the family together." "You mean in my house?" She nodded. "I told myself you'd understand eventually." "You never asked." "I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That you'd say no." There it was. Not malice, fear. Fear had slowly transformed into entitlement, then into manipulation, and finally into deception. None of that excused what she'd done, but it explained how she'd justified it to herself. Rachel wiped tears from her eyes. "Mom, you should have trusted me." "I know." "You made me part of something I didn't even understand." "I know." "You let me believe Miranda had already agreed." Mom nodded. "I know." Rachel looked over at me. "I honestly thought she was handling the difficult conversation because she knew you'd eventually say yes." "I wish that had been true." "So do I." She looked devastated. For several seconds, no one spoke. Finally, I asked the question that had been bothering me since the beginning. "The keys." Mom closed her eyes. "What about them? Whose idea was that?" She answered immediately. "Mine." Rachel looked shocked. "You copied her keys." Mom nodded. "I thought—" Her voice cracked. "I thought if the girls already had access, it would feel natural." Rachel stared at her. "I never asked you to do that." "I know. I didn't even know you had." "I know." The room fell quiet again. Something inside me shifted. For days, I'd believed Rachel and Mom had been working together as equal partners. That wasn't entirely true. Rachel had accepted assumptions she never questioned. She had allowed paperwork to be completed without asking enough questions. She had benefited from Mom's decisions. Those were her mistakes. But copying the keys, entering my home, taking documents, creating the illusion that I had already agreed. Those choices belonged to one person. Mom. Rachel looked at me. "I'm responsible for not asking enough questions." I nodded. "Yes, but I never wanted to force you out of your own life." "I believe you. I should have come to you myself." "You should have." She wiped another tear away. "I'm sorry." There was nothing dramatic about it. No grand speech, no excuses. Just 2 words spoken quietly. They felt real. Mom looked between us. "So,
What happens now?
It was the first time she'd asked instead of assumed. I don't know yet. She nodded slowly. I deserve that answer. Another silence settled over the room. This one felt different. Not hostile, honest. Then my phone buzzed on the table. Daniel Brooks. I excused myself and stepped into the kitchen.
Hello? Miranda. How did it go?
They admitted everything.
Everything.
More than I expected. He listened while I summarized the conversation. When I finished, he remained quiet for several seconds. I have one final question.
Okay.
Do you believe your mother understands what she did? I looked through the kitchen window. Mom sat alone at the dining room table. Her shoulders were slumped. Rachel was quietly collecting the school forms and utility papers she'd brought. For the first time since this began, no one was trying to convince me of anything.
I think she finally does.
Good. He paused. The next decision is yours.
What decision?
Whether you want accountability or punishment.
I don't understand. You already have enough evidence to pursue a criminal complaint for the unauthorized entries into your home.
I closed my eyes. The possibility had always existed. I simply hadn't allowed myself to think about it.
I want you to take it tonight, Daniel continued. Don't answer now.
Tomorrow we'll discuss your legal options. After we ended the call, I remained in the kitchen for another minute. I had spent days collecting evidence because I wanted the truth. Now, I had it. The question wasn't whether I could take legal action. The question was whether doing so would bring justice or simply leave another wound my family would never recover from. I barely slept that night. Not because I was afraid anymore, because I finally had choices. For the past several weeks, I'd been reacting to one discovery after another. Every new document, every security video, every conversation had pushed me toward the next step before I had time to think. Now the evidence was complete. The lies had been exposed. No one was denying what had happened. For the first time since I walked into my garage and found my mother copying my keys, I wasn't chasing the truth. I was deciding what to do with it. Monday morning, I met Daniel Brooks at his office again. He already had a legal pad waiting on the conference table. I've outlined 3 possible paths, he said. He drew 3 columns. First, he pointed to the left, you could pursue a criminal complaint regarding the unauthorized entries into your home. I nodded. That decision would belong to law enforcement and ultimately the prosecutor. It doesn't guarantee charges, but your documentation is substantial. He moved to the second column, civil action. What would that accomplish? If your missing documents caused financial harm, or if unauthorized access resulted in measurable damages, there could be civil remedies.
I don't think that's what I want. I suspected as much.
Finally, he tapped the third column. Boundaries. I looked up. Explain.
We formalize expectations. No ownership claims. No occupancy claims. No unauthorized access. No future confusion. In writing.
That felt different. Not weaker, just cleaner. I don't want my mother arrested. Daniel nodded. You've said that from the beginning. I don't want revenge.
I know.
I want this to stop. He smiled slightly.
Then let's make it stop.
For the next hour, we prepared a series of documents that were surprisingly simple. A formal cease and desist letter instructing both Linda Holland and Rachel Turner not to enter my property without permission. A written notice revoking any previously implied permission to access my home. A statement confirming that no one other than me had ownership or residency rights. Nothing dramatic, nothing threatening, just clear, specific, legally documented. Before I left, Daniel asked one last question.
Would you like me to send these?
I thought about it. Then I shook my head.
No.
I'd like to hand them over myself. I think that's wise. Rachel asked to meet me that evening. Just the two of us. We chose a small public park halfway between our homes. The girls were with a neighbor. Rachel looked exhausted. I've been thinking all day. So have I. She sat on a bench beside the playground. I owe you more than an apology. You don't owe me a speech. No. I owe you honesty. She reached into her purse and removed a folder. I brought everything. Inside were copies of every document Mom had ever asked her to complete. School paperwork, mail forwarding forms, apartment correspondence, utility information. She slid them toward me. I want you to have these. You don't need to. I do. She looked down. I should have questioned why every form already had your address filled in. I nodded. Yes. I wanted to believe Mom knew what she was doing. I understand. She laughed bitterly. Turns out neither of us asked enough questions. For the first time in days, we both smiled. It didn't erase anything, but it reminded me that we were still sisters beneath all the damage. I found another apartment, she said quietly. I looked up. What? A coworker's cousin is renting a townhouse. When? I can move in next month. Relief washed over me. The girls already saw it. They like it. They're excited. I'm glad. Rachel looked directly at me. I never wanted your house. I know. I wanted stability. I know. I just went about it the wrong way. You let someone else make decisions for you. She nodded. I won't do that again. I believed her. Not because of emotion, because her actions had finally started matching her words. Before leaving, I handed her one of Daniel's prepared documents. She read every line carefully. It simply acknowledged that she had never been granted residency or ownership rights in my home and had no future claim to them. She signed without hesitation. I should have done this weeks ago. Maybe, but we're here now. She handed the signed copy back. I hope someday you'll trust me again. I hope so too. Mom called later that night. I heard you met with Rachel. We did. How is she? Looking for a fresh start. Mom sounded relieved. Good. Then she became quiet. Miranda. Yes. I know you'll probably never forgive me. I thought carefully before answering. This isn't about forgiveness. It isn't, no. It's about trust. She didn't interrupt. You walked into my home when I wasn't there. You copied my keys. You removed documents. You made plans for my future without asking. I can't pretend those things didn't happen. I know. I don't hate you. Her breathing caught. But our relationship has to change. Another long silence. What does that mean? It means you don't come into my house unless I invite you. I understand. It means you don't make decisions for me. I understand. It means if you need something, you ask. I understand. She was crying quietly now. I'm so sorry. I know. No, I don't think you do. She took a shaky breath. I kept telling myself I was protecting both my daughters. But I never stopped to ask whether either of you wanted protecting. That sentence stayed with me long after we ended the call. A week later, Daniel mailed the remaining legal notices by certified mail. There was no argument, no threats, no dramatic family showdown. Just signatures confirming delivery. A few relatives called. Some said I had gone too far. Others admitted they finally understood what had really happened after seeing the documents. Uncle Thomas called one evening. I owe you an apology. You don't. I believed your mother. So did Rachel. So did I. He sighed. I should have asked you before showing up with my truck. You didn't know. No. But I know now. That mattered. Truth had a quiet way of changing people.
Not everyone, but enough.
Months passed. Life gradually settled into something that felt normal again. Work became work instead of an escape. The house became peaceful again. The girls visited occasionally, but only after Rachel texted first. Exactly the way healthy families ask. Then one Saturday morning, almost 6 months after everything began, my phone lit up with a message from Mom. Could we have coffee? Just us. No agenda. I only want to talk if you're ready. I read it twice. It was the first request she'd made in months that wasn't disguised as a decision already made. It was simply a question. And somehow that small difference told me more than any apology ever could. I didn't answer my mother's text immediately, not because I wanted to punish her. I simply wasn't ready. That was something I had finally learned over the previous 6 months. You don't owe anyone immediate access to your time just because they ask, especially when rebuilding trust. 2 days later, I replied, "Coffee on Thursday, 1 hour." She answered almost instantly, "Thank you. Nothing else. No heart emoji, no guilt, no family comes first. Just 2 words. It was the first message from her in a very long time that didn't ask me to carry her emotions. We met at the same neighborhood cafe where Rachel and I had talked months earlier. Mom was already there when I arrived. She stood as I approached. For a second, I thought she might hug me. Instead, she waited. "I wasn't sure if you wanted one." "I appreciate you asking." That tiny moment mattered more than either of us admitted. She had asked, and she had waited for my answer. We ordered coffee. For several minutes, we talked about ordinary things. The weather, my garden, Emma's soccer season, Lily losing another tooth. The conversation felt awkward. Not because we had nothing to say, because we were learning how to speak without pretending the past hadn't happened. Eventually, Mom folded her hands around her coffee cup. "I've rehearsed this conversation 100 times. I believe you." And every version sounded like I was defending myself. She looked down. "I don't want to do that anymore." I stayed quiet. I was wrong. There it was. No explanation, no qualification, no but, just the truth. I convinced myself that because I loved both of my daughters, I had the right to rearrange their lives. A tear rolled down her cheek. "I stopped respecting that you were an adult." She laughed softly through the tears. "I still saw you as the woman who always fixed everything." "I thought you would eventually fix this too." "I almost did," I admitted. She looked surprised. "When Rachel first called me crying, I almost handed over my house." She nodded slowly. "I know. I would have helped. I believe that now. But I needed the chance to choose." Mom covered her face for a moment. "I stole that choice from you." "Yes, I did." For the first time since everything began, I felt something loosen inside me. Not because the pain disappeared, because someone had finally named it correctly. The betrayal had never really been about the house. It had been about choice. A week later, Rachel invited me to dinner at her new townhouse. It wasn't large, but it was warm. The girls had already decorated their bedrooms with colorful drawings taped to the walls. Emma proudly gave me a tour. "Aunt Miranda, look." She pointed at a tiny reading corner beside her bed. "This is my favorite place." Lily tugged on my sleeve. "And I have my own closet." They were so excited that you'd never guess how frightened they had been only months earlier. Rachel caught my eye from the kitchen. "They're happy." "I can see that." She smiled. "I am too." During dinner, she pushed a small envelope across the table. "What's this?" She shrugged. "I think it belongs to you." Inside was my missing emergency property authorization packet. I stared at it. Every page was there. exactly as I'd left it. "Where did you find this?" Rachel looked embarrassed. "It was in one of Mom's filing boxes." She forgot she still had it. I slowly flipped through the documents. Nothing had been altered. Nothing had been signed. Nothing had been copied. It had simply been removed. Seeing it again felt strangely emotional, not because of what the papers were worth, because they represented the moment I first realized something inside my family had changed. Rachel looked at me carefully. "I almost mailed it. Why didn't you—" "I thought I should hand it to you myself." I nodded. "Thank you." Life continued, slowly, quietly. There were no dramatic reunions, no miraculous return to the way things used to be. Instead, something better happened. Honesty became normal. Mom called before visiting. Rachel asked before making plans. Family dinners happened only when everyone genuinely wanted to be there. Sometimes I said yes, sometimes I said no. Both answers were accepted. One Saturday afternoon, Mom stood on my front porch holding a pie she'd baked. She smiled when I opened the door. "I called first." "You did." "And you invited me." "I did." She glanced toward the entryway. "I noticed something." "What?" "You changed the locks." I smiled. "Months ago." "I know." She hesitated. "I don't expect a key." I looked at her for a moment. Then I answered honestly, "You won't be getting one." She nodded. "I figured." She wasn't offended. She wasn't surprised. She simply accepted it. That acceptance meant more to me than if she'd argued. Because trust isn't rebuilt by demanding proof. It's rebuilt by respecting limits. A few weeks later, while cleaning my home office, I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. Inside sat a large manila envelope. Across the front, I'd written one label in black marker: evidence. Inside were the photographs, the security logs, the utility emails, the school enrollment form, copies of the certified letters, the timeline, and one small key ring with handwritten labels: front door, garage, office, master bedroom. I held it in my hand for several seconds, then I placed it back inside the envelope. Not because I planned to use it again, but because forgetting isn't the same as healing. Healing means remembering what happened without allowing it to control who you become. The locks on my house had changed months ago. The boundaries in my life had changed forever. And that turned out to be the strongest protection I could ever build. For a long time, I believed loving your family meant keeping the door open, no matter how many times they walked through it without permission. What I learned instead is that healthy relationships require both love and respect. Boundaries are not walls built to keep people out. They are clear agreements about how we are allowed to treat one another. If you've ever been made to feel guilty for protecting your home, your finances, your peace, or your future, I hope this story reminds you that saying no does not make you selfish. Forgiveness and reconciliation are deeply personal choices, but they are not the same as restoring unlimited access. Someone can be welcomed back into your life without receiving the same privileges they once abused. Sometimes justice doesn't look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like calm documentation, honest conversations, legal protection when necessary, and the courage to choose peace over resentment. Those quiet decisions often create the strongest foundation for healing. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with someone you loved? Share your experience or perspective in the comments. Your story may encourage someone else who feels alone. And if you enjoy thoughtful stories about family resilience and finding strength through wisdom instead of revenge, I'd be honored if you subscribed and joined us for the next journey. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.